Are you one of the 5 people that still subscribe to the Oprah Winfrey Network? If so, then you should read Beloved by Toni Morrison. Before we get to the review, I'm going to answer one question. Did I enjoy reading this book? That's not the right question because I didn't actually enjoy reading the book. But am I glad I read Beloved by Toni Morrison? The answer is yes. Yes, I am. Hey guys, welcome to Whiskey and Literature, where we read and discuss the greatest books of all time. And while we are turning those pages, we're sipping those bottles, those finely distilled spirits. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm reading and reviewing 52 books in 52 weeks in 2023. This is my 14th book review of the year so far, Beloved by Toni Morrison. I will say that as a 50-year-old white male, born and raised in South Carolina, I could walk into any bookstore and I could have found 1,001 books that I would have rather read than Beloved. And that's a shame because this book deserves to be read. And before we get to the book, let's talk about Mrs. Morrison. She was born in 1936, passed away in 2019. She was an American novelist and fierce advocate for the African American community. Her works often address the consequences of racism and the Black American experience. She was the first Black female editor at Random House for fiction, and she won many awards. The National Book Critics Circle Award, Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize in Literature, Jefferson Lecture, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame posthumously. Okay, before we get to the book, let's talk very briefly about the whiskey of the week. As I was preparing for this video, I knew that I needed Uncle Nearest whiskey for this book review. If you know, you know. So look for Uncle Nearest 1856 review to drop on Wednesday. Now let's talk about the specs and stats of Beloved. Beloved was published in 1987, and I would consider this a historical fiction novel. And it was based on true events, or at least inspired by a true event. Margaret Garner was an escaped slave who ran away, and when she was discovered by the U.S. Marshals who came to take her back, she tried to kill her children rather than have them return to slavery, and she did succeed in killing her daughter. Beloved won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988 and was adapted into a film by Oprah Winfrey in 1998. My copy of the book has 324 pages, and while I did read some, I did mainly listen to this book on Audible. There's only one version of Beloved on Audible, 12 hours and 3 minutes long, read by Toni Morrison herself. And I'm just going to say how I feel about authors reading their own books, and then we're just going to move on. I think there's 2 reasons that authors read their own books. First, economy. You do this work, you do all this labor, and you want to reap all the rewards yourself. And so if you read your own book, you get to keep more of the proceeds. The second reason, and I think the most likely reason why an author would choose to read their own book, is because pride. They put all this sweat and tears into this work. They're an artist, and they know all the shades and meaning and all the events and everything the characters do and say in their book, and nobody else could bring that forth like they could, which is bull. The whole point of having a professional narrator or actor read your book is the skill that they bring to the table. And while I will say that Toni Morrison's voice was absolutely perfect for the narration of Beloved, her delivery fell far short. I felt like it was a beautiful work of art framed with a homemade frame. Okay, let's talk about the plot, the structure, and the characters of Beloved. It's a fairly straightforward book. though we are treated to quite a few flashbacks to flesh out the story and the characters. In fact, I think that maybe there's more flashbacks than actual story in Beloved. We begin at House 124 in 1873, and there are only 3 people left in the house. We have Setha, the runaway slave, we have her daughter, Denver, and we have the spiteful spirit. Remember that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, and the Civil War ended in 1865, which was 8 years prior to the beginning of this novel setting. Setha and her husband and some other slaves had decided to make a run for it. Of course, the night when they're supposed to make this happen, it all falls apart, and Setha ends up having to run away by herself. She is helped by a white woman, Amy Denver, to deliver her baby in the woods, hence the name Denver for her daughter. She eventually makes it to Ohio, to baby Suggs, her mother-in-law's house, and everything is fine, wonderful for about a month, until the plantation's foreman tracks her down and tries to take her back. And here's where the truth is woven in. Instead of allowing herself and her children to go back into slavery, she decides to keep her kids safe by killing them. She only succeeds with one of her daughters. And on that girl's headstone is the name Beloved. After this, everything goes downhill. The black community in the area shuns 124. Setha's boys, they run away. Baby Suggs, she gives up and dies. They live like this for years. Denver basically shut inside the house. Setha only leaving to work at a local restaurant until Paul D., another runaway slave, shows up. He chases away the spirit in the house and begins a relationship with Setha. One evening they find a nearly dead girl in front of the house, and she calls herself Beloved. And this is when the story really begins. There are relatively few characters in this book at all. We have Setha, Denver, Paul D., and Beloved. I think Toni Morrison did a great job bringing all these characters to life, and I felt as if I was right there with them, watching everything occur. As Setha tries to find forgiveness by fulfilling Beloved's every wish. As Beloved slowly pushes Denver out of Setha's life. As Denver tries to find herself, save her mother, and join the black community. As Paul D. learns the truth, and it overwhelms him. Okay, so what did I think of Beloved? This is not a fun read. It's slow, it's sad, it's deep, it's tragic, and it's difficult to read. There's violence, the terrible kind. Sex, not loving embraces, but rape, bestiality, and animalistic. You are forced to stare in the face of some of the most awful things that can be done by one human to another. The violence and sex are not explicit in nature, but very difficult to read nonetheless. Beloved coming back to Setha is symbolic of the consequences of slavery and racism, returning and being visited upon individuals and the nation as a whole. As Beloved was fed and indulged, she grew stronger and larger, and Setha grew feebler and smaller. It took Denver's love and the voice of the community to make everything right. The most moving scene for me in the entire book was when Denver finally broke free and she went to and asked for and received help from the community that has shunned them for so long. I was literally crying as I was driving to work, wiping away tears at the outpouring of love and fellowship. I'm glad to have read Beloved. This isn't really my cup of tea. I'm not going to read it again or any more of Toni Morrison's book. But I am glad to have read this one. And I think you should if you haven't. Okay, guys, and last thing here, I am going to start giving my book reviews a star rating. It's going to be a new thing on my channel, and I wish I had done it sooner, but we're going to start with this one. And I'm going to base it on 5 criteria and give each book a star rating. And here's my criteria. First, my initial response. And how do I feel as soon as I finished the book? And I'll tell you what, I'm only going to give Beloved a 3. That seems low, but reading this book is like watching Schindler's List. You get done with that movie, you get done with this book, and you don't actually feel, great or good. It's just, so I'm going to give it a 3. Recommendation. How likely am I to recommend this book? I'm going to give it a 4 because it's not for everybody, but I will recommend it to those who I think would be good for. 3. Style. Did I enjoy the writing style? And I'm going to give it a 5 because I like the use of flashbacks. You move the story and you leave the reader kind of wondering, and then you fill them in later with some backstory. Like Baby Suggs was in the beginning of the book, and she says 2 words and then she's dead. But she's got a whole story which is fleshed out later in the book, and I really like that writing style. That's a 5 for me. Plot and structure. How engaged was I in the story? And I'm only going to give it a 3. There were some parts that I was I was wishing the story would move along faster or would move forward at least. So 3. Characters. Were they relatable, believable, engaging? I'm going to say believable, certainly. Engaging, yes. Relatable, I don't really have these experiences. Not relatable to me. But I'm still going to give them a 5 for the characters because they were great. They were filled out when they needed to be, thin when they shouldn't be. We just moved along. I enjoyed the characters. They were written so well. And I'm going to give this book a 6th rating as well because those that I listened to on Audible, I'm going to give a rating for how that I think the production was on the Audible book. And unfortunately, I'm only going to give it a 3 for the Audible. Again, she had a perfect voice for this story, but delivery was mediocre. And okay, that's 23. And 23 divided by 6 is 3.83. So Beloved by Toni Morrison, my first book rating with the stars, gets a 3.83 stars. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me. In the description below are the links to my other book reviews this year. If you enjoy the video, like it. It's free. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Any suggestions, comments, you know what to do. All right, my friends, I hope you're reading something good and drinking something good. Turn those pages and stay thirsty.